For more on this, I'm now joined by Tony Gosling, historian and investigative journalist. Very good to have you on the program, Tony. What do you think about the significance of Mr. Bagai's comments?
Well, in terms of human rights, what the UN is saying is that they don't like the fact that Iran is an Islamic Republic, because the discrimination against women, as they describe it, is actually exactly the same sort of headwear, for example, that the British Queen used to wear in the 1950s, 1960s and 1970s. This is considered to be a discrimination, but actually it's just part of what it means to be an Islamic Republic. The same with the treatment of religious minorities. Now, what they're saying really is that they just want Iran to go secular. That's what effectively they're saying, that we don't want these kinds of religious ideas to be permeating through the nation. And, you know, obviously they've got a point when it comes to any form of discrimination, but the discrimination that's going on in Iran today that the UN is voting on is nothing anywhere near as bad as the sort of discrimination that's going on now in Syria with Jilani and his head choppers being removed from the UK terror list. That's the idea, is we think these are great people now because they're serving the greater Israel purposes. And so the religious discrimination that they are bringing about by forcing Christians in Syria to hide their crosses to make sure that they're not shown to be Christians in public, this is not in that resolution, is it? And that's funny because this has been introduced by the Canadians to the United Nations. Now, the Canadians are part of a hybrid warfare campaign against Iran, against Russia, and against the Arab countries, in fact against China too. And the hybrid warfare includes exactly what we're seeing going on at the United Nations. So it's the sorts of poisoned resolutions which are specifically aimed to isolate a specific nation such as Iran.
And Tony, at the same time, we're witnessing that as soon as a country becomes united or becomes kind of an ally to the collective West, they do not practically care about the human rights abuses in that country. And if a country is sort of against them or standing up to them, they try to point fingers to all sorts of things, founded or unfounded. What's your say on that?
Well, look, I really actually admire the deputy UN ambassador from Iran, and even if some of the delegates and ambassadors to the United Nations from countries around the world were not allowed to say it, I'm sure they quietly admired him for pointing out that it's not for those who sponsor colonialism, slavery and racism and apartheid to lecture Iran on human rights. Well, that really does cut right through this Canadian resolution, doesn't it? Because what we're seeing now is a potential World War III being started by these old colonial powers who pretended that they had moved away like the British at the end of the Second World War, and they then start to use things like financial warfare against countries like Iran, that is to say, sanctions and other forms of financial warfare against Lebanon, against Syria. This is what they call hybrid warfare, and the protagonists here are really the Five Eyes countries and the NATO countries, but mainly the Five Eyes. That is to say, the Britain and the United States, plus New Zealand, Australia, and guess who? Canada, who's supporting and promoting this motion. Really, as they're just doing what they're told by the Anglo-Zionist Empire, bringing this in as a form of warfare, not exactly what the United Nations is supposed to be for. And if you examine closely the links between the Canadian intelligence, the CSIS, and ISIS, we had 3 young English schoolgirls, 15 years of age, in East London. Shamima Begum and her 2 friends were recruited by CSIS, the Canadian intelligence, to fly to Turkey. They were groomed on Facebook to do this, and then once they arrived in Turkey, they were met by a CSIS agent who was later offered or given a Canadian passport for his trouble, and he went down and paid for the fares to bust these 3 young girls down to become ISIS brides in the south of Turkey and then into Syria. Shamima Begum now, poor woman, is in a refugee camp, and they will not allow her to have her British passport back because they know if she was to come back to Britain, she would be talking on street corners and in all the press about how she has been used and abused by the NATO intelligence services to fight for ISIS. So these are the sorts of real things that the UN should be getting its teeth into, and it's absolutely the pot calling the kettle black to have the Canadian intelligence pointing the finger at Iran in this way. And finally, I'd like to just mention that I actually agree with very stiff and severe penalties for corrupt bankers and public officials, which this is effectively what is being criticised here too by the Canadians.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Tony. Allow me to jump in there for the sake of time.
We don't do that here in Britain, apparently. We don't actually jail any bankers. We just let them run loose. So I admire the Iranians for their tough treatment of the corrupt banking profession, particularly.
Thank you, Tony Gosling, historian and investigative journalist, joining us from Bristol in the UK.